I witnessed real alien bodies in Congress worse than you think, and the moment I laid eyes on them, every belief I held about government secrets shattered. You might wonder if I'd already been one of those conspiracy buffs who lurk in obscure forums at night, searching for any scrap of truth behind centuries of unexplained sightings. The truth is, I used to scoff at every rumor of men in black or top-secret alien autopsies, convinced that if something this huge were real, the public would have found out long ago. Yet here I stand, haunted by what I saw inside those restricted chambers, haunted enough to question whether my entire understanding of our country's power structure was built on a convenient lie. At first, I thought I must be imagining things. Did I really see that? Or was my mind playing tricks to fill the darkness with shadows I wanted to believe in? It all began when I accompanied a well-known congressman to a closed-door briefing late last autumn. The day was unremarkable, the kind of crisp afternoon in Washington, D.C. that makes you grateful for a hot cup of coffee. But beneath the veneer of routine politics, there was a palpable tension hovering in the cold air. People talked in hushed voices, passing manila envelopes as if a single misplaced word would unravel a secret older than any official record. I was there as a silent observer, only meant to keep track of schedules and take notes on legislative proposals. At least, that's what I was told. I've never been much of a believer in official UFO cover-ups, especially after hearing the official explanation for the 2004 USS Nimitz UFO encounter. Just advanced radar anomalies, they said. Growing up, I accepted that story the same way I accepted any number of polite fictions we're fed as children. Congress wasn't known for hush-hush dealings about extraterrestrial life. They had enough trouble agreeing on earthly matters. But the buzz that day was different. Staffers whispered about unidentified wreckage, documents that went missing from the National Archives, and anomalies reported by military radar operators. Every glance in the hallway carried a silent question. Did someone finally stumble across conclusive proof? Or was this just another wild goose chase? A few of us ended up in a sub-basement corridor, far from the ornate committees and press rooms. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and flickered, casting a pale, sickly glow on the polished floor. Officially, this section was used for storage or seldom-invoked emergency meetings. Unofficially, we'd heard rumors of top-level sessions regarding classified materials. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached a steel door guarded by two solemn-faced security personnel. One of them eyed me suspiciously, scanning my badge twice before reluctantly waving me in. Inside, the air felt stale, as though it had been cycled through vents that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. The congressman led me past crates stacked floor to ceiling, each labeled with a series of letters and numbers I couldn't decipher. Then I saw them. 3 long, cylindrical containers set on wheeled carts. They were positioned at the far end of the room, beneath a single spotlight that flickered like a dying firefly. The reflection of that faint light on the steel surfaces gave them an almost reverent aura. My first thought was that they must contain advanced weapon prototypes or classified tech from a foreign adversary. The truth was infinitely more unsettling. I couldn't tear my eyes away. One of the containers had a series of fine cracks along its side. Through that fractured window, I glimpsed something that did not look remotely human. It was grayish, almost translucent, with elongated limbs that defied normal anatomical structure. Part of me instantly wanted to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a preserved animal, something from an overseas lab, or even a realistic prop. But then I saw small ridges down its spine, an eerie sign of a life form I'd never read about in any biology textbook. My breathing became shallow. Standing there, I recalled all the times I'd heard congressional leaders dismiss UFO sightings as flukes of radar or psychological illusions. The official narrative had always been so convincing, but now it contradicted the reality in front of my eyes. Before I had time to process, an alarm buzzer echoed down the corridor, followed by frantic footsteps. A voice over the intercom, its tone sharp with urgency, ordered everyone to vacate the facility. Security staff rushed in, herding us toward the exit. The last thing I saw was a flicker of movement inside that cracked container. It was slight, almost imperceptible, yet it made my heart hammer so hard I thought I might pass out. Was it just a shift in fluid, or had the thing actually stirred? My mind spun with possibilities as we were pushed back through the steel door. Even in the chaos, I couldn't ignore the prickling sense that something far bigger lurked behind these secret viewings. Something more unsettling than any fictional tale about little green men. The memory of that container's occupant seared itself into my brain, and I knew I could never look at the world the same way again. In the blur of confusion, I managed to slip away from the small crowd outside the sub-basement. I didn't care about consequences anymore. I had to know. Every fiber of my being urged me to dig deeper, to question every official statement ever given about UFOs, alien bodies, or hush-hush government experiments. Yet, the more I thought about it, the less certain I became about my own safety. If such things were truly stored here, would anyone dare let me walk away without repercussions? That was when I heard a soft, echoing voice from somewhere beyond the locked door. A voice that didn't belong to any of us. In that moment, I realized nothing would ever be the same. The moment that sealed my suspicion came barely an hour after I first glimpsed those impossible forms through the cracked container. I was pacing in an empty corner of the sub-basement corridor, wrestling with my own thoughts when the overhead lights dimmed and a high-pitched alarm blasted through the concrete walls. Before I could process what was happening, 2 harried security officers sprinted down the hallway. One of them shouted that something had triggered a sensor in the restricted storage area. My stomach dropped. I knew what that meant. One of those steel containers was no longer where it was supposed to be. For a fleeting moment, my mind swirled with relief and terror in equal measure. Relief because it felt like I was on the verge of a monumental revelation. Terror because it confirmed my worst fear. Those specimens might be more active, more alive, than any of us had dared to imagine. I followed the guards back inside, adrenaline coursing through me. My eyes locked on the far corner of the room, where one of the containers had been moved several feet from its original position. Even the congressman stood frozen, confusion etched across his face. We all stared, transfixed at the deep scrape marks on the floor. Had someone tried to cart it away in secret, or had the container moved on its own? The congressman insisted that no one had touched it. He'd been stationed right outside with a small group of staffers. My heart pounded. I thought for one surreal second that we were about to discover one of those beings out in the open. But the container remained sealed shut, at least from what I could tell. What we had mistaken for a major breakthrough turned out to be just another layer of the puzzle. An official in a rumpled suit came barreling in, barking at the guards to calm down. He brushed aside our questions, muttering something about a faulty hydraulic mechanism that could have jerked the container out of place. His explanation was so quick, so dismissive it felt rehearsed. Yet I wasn't the only one who found this malfunction story suspicious. A lab technician, someone I'd never seen before, quietly admitted to me that the container was locked from the outside. Any automated system should have been powered down after the alarm. He wouldn't give his name, just stared at me with eyes that revealed equal parts curiosity and dread. I tried to press for more details, but he shook his head and rushed away, as if afraid of being overheard. In that moment, I realized that whatever I had stumbled upon was bigger than a few classified crates, and my presence here was a precarious tightrope walk. The air in the sub-basement had a chill now, a biting cold that seemed to seep through the reinforced walls. The fluorescent lights buzzed, creating a faint strobe effect that made the shadows on the floor look alive. Every whisper echoed, and I kept glancing at the stacked crates, half expecting something to leap out from behind them. The congressman was huddled with a small circle of his aides, their voices low and urgent. I wanted to ask him outright, "What do you really know about these containers?" But the way he avoided my eyes spoke volumes. The entire complex felt different after that near incident, surreal, claustrophobic. More guards appeared, patrolling every corridor, as if the entire building had slipped under lockdown without a formal announcement. I heard snatches of hushed conversations, talk of unreadable symbols etched on the containers, rumors of bizarre signals interfering with official radio frequencies, and suggestions that certain records of this operation had been systematically erased from congressional databases. One staffer whispered that an outside agency had been called in. Not the FBI, he insisted. Something else. My rational mind fought to find a normal explanation. Maybe we were overreacting to coincidences, letting fear spin illusions. But each contradictory statement from the officials only fanned the flames of paranoia. Those of us who had seen the flicker of movement, or believed we did, began to compare. Stories, quietly at first, behind closed doors. We realized we all had different instructions. Some were told to forget it ever happened. Others were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements under threat of legal consequences. The building tension was palpable, a mix of anxiety and suppressed excitement. Late that night, after the chaos had died down, I found myself alone in a small break room off the main corridor. The hum of air ducts overhead droned like a distant warning. My mind raced through the day's events, piecing together the anomalies. The container shifting without explanation, the officials' hurried dismissal, the lab tech's silent terror. I knew we were missing a critical piece of the puzzle. Then I remembered the incomplete phrase I'd caught from the intercom right before the alarm. It was just a few words in a language I couldn't place, but it sent a chill through me then, and the thought of it did so again now. As I sipped tepid coffee, the congressman peeked into the room. He looked exhausted, his jacket streaked with dust, but his gaze was intense. "We need to talk," he whispered. "There's more going on here than you realize." Before I could respond, the lights suddenly winked out, and a wave of static hissed through the overhead speakers. Panic stabbed at my gut. Something was about to happen. When the emergency lights flickered back on, the congressman was gone. I bolted into the corridor, calling his name, only to find the hallway silent and empty. A single piece of paper lay on the floor, an unmarked sheet with what looked like a faint set of numbers or code scrawled across it. At the far end of the corridor, I heard the echo of heavy footsteps moving away in haste. My instincts told me to follow, but my fear told me to turn back. My world was unraveling, yet I couldn't stop now. Whatever was behind this conspiracy, whatever had been locked inside those containers, was just the tip of something far more sinister. That's when I heard a low hum from deeper within the sub-basement, growing louder by the second, and a voice on the intercom muttered words that should not have existed in any human language. By the time I left the sub-basement's break room, my hands trembled with a mix of fear and determination. The congressman's abrupt disappearance felt like a warning. This place and everything in it was far more dangerous than I'd imagined. I replayed the recent events in my mind, searching for any clue I might have overlooked. Was he abducted? Or had he fled? The emergency lights cast flickering shadows along the corridor, and every clank of metal in the distance made my pulse spike. The coded numbers on the piece of paper I'd found offered no immediate explanation, just a string of digits that seemed to mock my growing desperation. Outside, a small group of staffers gathered in the main hallway. Their hushed voices carried rumors of personnel suddenly transferred to distant facilities, and even of a security guard who vanished without handing in his resignation. One staffer swore he saw that guard escorted away in handcuffs. Another insisted the guard had stormed out on his own. The contradictions left us all uneasy. Word had spread that our cell phones were picking up garbled signals, as though someone or something was scrambling communications within these walls. I tried to reach the congressman's phone, but each call dropped into static before it could ring. While I wandered deeper into the facility, I ran into a woman named Mara, a low-level researcher who looked as spooked as I felt. She was cradling a bundle of folders so tight her knuckles turned white. When I asked if she knew anything about the missing containers, she hesitated. "I've been assigned to study atmospheric anomalies, nothing to do with alien biology," she whispered. Yet she'd spotted the same cryptic symbols carved into the steel crates. Symbols that matched old sketches from a declassified project known as Operation Firebreak, a name I had never heard before. I pressed her for details, but she shook her head, insisting the risk was too great if anyone saw us talking. Determined to learn more, I spent the next hour combing through deserted corridors, flickering overhead lights guiding my search. The hum of air conditioning vents felt unnaturally loud. My footsteps echoed on the polished floors. I stumbled upon a locked gate labeled Restricted Archives, its chain secured by a brand new padlock that glinted under the dim light. From beyond the gate drifted a stale odor, like dust and old chemicals. My instincts screamed that something crucial was hidden back there. I tried to find a way around, but every door was sealed. Just as I was about to give up, I heard faint clicking sounds from the other side of the barrier, like someone moving in the darkness. Half expecting to confront a guard, I called out softly, but there was no response. Suddenly, that soft clicking grew frantic, darting deeper into the unlit corridor. Then came silence, heavier than any I'd felt before. My heart thundered in my ears. A wave of dread washed over me, feeding the suspicion that we weren't just dealing with government secrets, but with forces that defied conventional logic. With no way through the gate, I turned away, only to find Mara standing behind me, breathless. She'd followed me, ignoring her own fear. "We can't stay here," she said. "Something bad is about to happen." Her voice wavered between anger and sheer terror. I was about to ask what she meant when the ceiling lights flickered wildly, plunging us into near darkness. A rumbling sound echoed through the corridors, like distant thunder trapped underground. Mara tensed, pressing her back against the wall. At that moment, a shrill scream tore through the silence, followed by frantic footsteps. We ran toward the noise, turning a corner just in time to see a security officer stumble against the wall, gasping for breath. He pointed a shaky finger toward the sub-basement levels and muttered something about shadows moving on their own. At 2/3 of the way down the stairwell, a metallic crash reverberated, and we caught a glimpse of a figure sprinting away, a shape almost humanoid but unnervingly lithe. My first thought was that it could be another staff member, terrified like us. But the way it moved felt off. Its head swiveled too far to the side, almost as if it sensed us without looking. We froze, uncertain whether to chase it or retreat. For a single heartbeat, it paused at the end of the hall, turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a low, buzzing hum that set my teeth on edge. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I followed Mara back into an adjacent corridor lined with small offices. Each room was locked, blinds drawn tight. Yet from one of them came the faint glow of a computer screen. We forced the door open to find piles of documents scattered across a desk, photos of strange wreckage, and typed reports referencing anomalous tissue samples. As I picked up one photo, my stomach twisted. It showed a partial autopsy table with what appeared to be the same gray, elongated limb I had glimpsed through the cracked container. A label scrawled in pen read, "Knot of Earth, 1988. Whatever theories I had before paled next to this stark evidence. Suddenly, all the lights died. An emergency siren blared overhead, and in the strobing red glow, I saw Mara's eyes widen in absolute horror. Footsteps pounded down the hall, multiple pairs this time, closing in fast. Before either of us could react, the door handle rattled violently, and a piercing voice shouted, "Open up now!" There was no telling if these were government forces, unknown creatures, or something far worse. The latch on the door began to give. Heart pounding, I backed away, clutching the photo of that inhuman limb. Mara and I exchanged a final glance, each of us realizing we were in imminent danger. I heard a loud crack as the door frame splintered, and in that instant I knew we'd run out of time. The door crashed open with a force that sent fragments of wood flying across the room. Mara and I dove behind a metal filing cabinet, clutching at each other in terror. My heart thumped so loudly it drowned out the clamor of heavy boots stampeding in. A beam of harsh flashlight swept across the desk and pinned me in its glare. We had nowhere to run, no time to escape. In a single panicked moment, I realized that whatever force had orchestrated this entire operation was closing in, determined to silence us before we learned too much. "Hands up! Stand where I can see you!" roared a voice, angry and authoritative. Two men in dark tactical gear advanced, guns trained on us. Their uniforms bore no insignia, no markings to explain which agency or power they truly served. One of them snatched the photo from my hand. Even in the chaos, I noticed the uneasy glance he exchanged with his partner when he saw the alien limb preserved in that old photograph. They forced us into the hallway, where more armed figures lined the walls. I recognized the congressman among them. He looked disheveled and shaken, but surprisingly unguarded. Something in his eyes told me he'd been coerced into compliance. Without warning, the group hustled us through a maze of corridors until we reached a sealed elevator flanked by thick steel doors. An officer keyed in a code and the doors parted to reveal an unmarked sublevel. The elevator descended with a jolt, plunging us into a hush so profound it felt like entering another world. We emerged into a room awash in sterile fluorescent light, an underground laboratory or facility. Rows of metal tables stretched out under high-intensity lamps. On some of these tables lay fragments of twisted metal, reminiscent of crashed wreckage. On others rested lumps of biomatter sealed in transparent tubes. The air carried a biting chemical scent that burned my nostrils. Mara squeezed my arm, her expression reflecting both fascination and horror. A wiry scientist in a crisp lab coat appeared from behind a partition. He waved the armed men off with a dismissive gesture, then beckoned Mara and me forward as though we were invited guests. "No need to fear," he said smoothly, though his smile never reached his eyes. "We've come too far to let ignorance derail our progress." He spoke with polished confidence, as if certain we'd never leave this place on our own terms. He led us to a back wall lined with opaque glass panels, each about the size of a door. With the press of a button, one panel turned transparent, revealing a cylindrical chamber beyond. At first, it was hard to see clearly. Steam or some kind of vapor swirled inside. But as the temperature-regulated glass cleared, a tall figure took shape in the dim interior. My breath caught in my throat. This was no lifeless specimen. It stood upright, limbs slightly contorted, its skin a mottled gray-green with faint luminescent lines that pulsed like veins. The eyes were closed, or perhaps covered by a thick membrane. "This is what you've been so curious about," the scientist murmured, trailing a hand across the console. "We recovered it years ago, alive, though it's in a form of induced stasis." My mind reeled. So it wasn't just about extraterrestrial corpses, but actual living beings held captive beneath the halls of Congress. I thought of all the rumors, all the official statements denying any contact with alien life. Now those denials revealed themselves as blatant lies. I turned to the congressman, words failing me. He avoided my gaze, swallowing hard. "We never wanted it to go this far," he whispered, "but we discovered too much to walk away." His voice trembled with guilt. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the strained set of his jaw. He was a man caught between loyalty to whatever secret authority he served and his own moral reckoning. My mind raced with questions. How long had they been harboring this being? Were they experimenting on it, learning from it? A memory flashed of the earlier hints. That coded message, the shifting container, the cryptic language on the intercom. Could it be that these entities communicated with us somehow? Or worse, that they communicated through us without our knowing? Before I could speak, the scientist approached a control panel and began flipping switches. A faint beep resonated, followed by a sudden surge of lights across multiple displays. Inside the chamber, the creature's eyes, or coverings, fluttered. My pulse hammered. Was it waking up? A wave of nauseating dread swept over me, and I sensed Mara stiffen beside me. "You see," the scientist said, his tone almost reverent, "we've only scratched the surface. Their technology, our technology, there's more overlap than you'd expect." A chilling pride glimmered in his eyes. For all we know, they could have been here before us. My knees felt weak. Part of me wanted to scream at the injustice of it all, at the moral implications of holding a living being captive. Another part of me felt a dark fascination. Was humanity truly alone? Or had we been sharing this planet, and possibly our institutions, with an intelligence far beyond our comprehension? Suddenly, alarms blared and red lights strobed along the ceiling. Over the intercom came that strange language again, warping and crackling with static. The scientist's smug grin vanished. He spun to face a nearby monitor, eyes widening. "No," he muttered. "That's impossible." A frantic beep erupted from the console, and in the chamber, the figure's eyes snapped open. In that instant, a surge of raw energy, like an electrical storm, scorched the air. Sparks exploded from the ceiling lights. Mara shrieked and grabbed my arm. The congressman shouted something lost in the chaos, and the scientist hammered at the control panel. The armed men rushed forward only to recoil as the stasis chamber hissed and cracked. That final moment felt like the end of everything we once knew, a living testament that humankind's deepest secrets were never ours to keep. And just like that, the chamber door swung open. When the chamber door swung open, everything I thought I understood about our world shattered in an instant. The creature stepped out, its movements unsteady yet disturbingly purposeful, each step resonating with a kind of unnatural grace. Sparks still danced across the lab's damaged light fixtures, illuminating the being's angular features in split-second flashes. My heart felt like it might burst from my chest. We had come face to face with living proof that Earth wasn't ours alone, and worse, our government had known for decades. Behind me, Mara crouched, torn between horror and fascination. The congressman stood rigid, his face drained of color, while the scientist sputtered in astonishment. I could almost hear the cogs of conspiracy grinding to a halt around us. Everything from the coded documents to the missing shipments suddenly made perfect, dreadful sense. Operation Firebreak, it seemed, had been more than an attempt to hide evidence. It was an ongoing project to harness whatever intelligence this entity possessed. What happened next felt more like a dream than reality. The armed men rushed forward, presumably to contain the creature. But before they could raise their weapons, the being extended its elongated arms and emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the air. For a heartbeat, I saw the soldiers recoil, as though paralyzed by an unseen force. Then the lights overhead shorted out entirely, plunging us into near-total darkness. In the flickering glow of emergency panels, I watched the alien tilt its head in our direction. A wave of conflicting emotions nearly overwhelmed me. Revulsion, awe, pity. Could this creature even comprehend what had been done to it? There was a chilling intelligence in its movements, a quick, darting awareness as it scanned our faces. And in that fleeting connection, I sensed something deeply unsettling. A quiet anger, as though we were no more than intruders meddling with forces we could never hope to master. The next thing I knew, alarms were screaming through the corridors, and the stench of burning circuits filled the air. Mara pulled me against the wall as the creature tore past us, a blur of motion that disappeared through the lab's shattered doorway. The scientist stumbled, shouting after it in a mixture of triumph and terror, like a father watching his child run wild. Meanwhile, the congressman sank against a table, covering his face as though wishing to wake from a nightmare. With the facility in lockdown, chaos reigned. Red emergency lights pulsed in every corridor, revealing fleeting snapshots of the devastation. Guards lay unconscious, doors were twisted off their hinges, and glass shards glittered underfoot. My mind replayed every cryptic fragment from the last few days. The coded numbers, the missing staffers, the unexplained footprints, and that stifled chatter about communication protocols. Now I understood. They'd been trying to talk with this being, to learn from it, or exploit it. The realization struck me like a physical blow. We had never been the masters here. We were merely novices, fumbling in the dark, playing with something far beyond our grasp. As Mara and I navigated the corridors in search of an exit, we came across a small operations room. Monitors lined the walls, displaying live feeds of the sub-basement's every angle. I stopped in my tracks at the sight of multiple pods identical to the one the alien had occupied. Some appeared empty, others showed murky silhouettes that hinted at more creatures in stasis. My mind reeled. If they'd been storing one alien here, how many others had arrived with it? And how many of them might be more awake, more aware than we realized? Suddenly, the congressman appeared behind us, panting hard. "You have to see this," he whispered, beckoning us toward a console in the corner. A file was open on the screen, revealing years, decades of concealed research. References to known cosmic anomalies dotted the pages, reports of covert landings in remote deserts, partnerships with military contractors. Multiple administrations had perpetuated the secrecy, weaving a web of denial so elaborate that most in power likely had no clue how deep it ran. My eyes skimmed lines discussing biological compatibility, hybrid intelligence, and silent infiltration. My stomach churned. Had these aliens walked among us, disguised by advanced technology or genetic manipulation? The potential scope was terrifying. Every thread of official history might be interlaced with a hidden narrative, one in which humanity wasn't the lone author. Then, a klaxon blasted and the screens flickered. On a live camera feed, the alien from the stasis chamber crouched in a darkened corridor. Its head snapped toward the camera lens. With a crackle of static, the screen went black. Mara gasped, and I realized we had no time left. If the facility was this close to collapse, so was our chance to reveal the truth. For all our terror, the world deserved to know. We sprinted through the winding passages until we found a freight elevator jammed open. As we ascended, each passing floor felt like a step further from the underbelly of a grand deceit, yet not necessarily safer. My mind churned with questions I couldn't possibly answer. Would the alien escape the compound? Had others already done so? And how long until the government locked this place down again, burying any trace of the truth? When at last we reached the surface, dawn was breaking over the skyline. The congressman, Mara, and I collapsed outside the fortified doors, our breaths ragged. None of us spoke for a long moment. In that quiet, I felt the weight of what we'd witnessed, and knew life would never be the same. If a living alien had been imprisoned beneath the most influential building in our government, what else might be hidden, waiting? For once, the congressman met my eyes with unguarded sincerity. "This can't stay hidden," he muttered. "People have a right to know." I nodded, though my thoughts were a maelstrom of fear and resolve. I still can't close my eyes without picturing that gray-green figure stepping free of its glass prison, aware, angry, and possibly vengeful. If our leaders have kept such secrets for so long, we have to wonder, what else have they concealed and for whose benefit? Even now, I'm not sure if the threat has passed or only just begun, but one thing is certain. We've only grazed the surface of a cosmic truth that could redefine humanity's place in the universe. And the questions echo louder every day. If they manage to lock away a living alien right under congressional floors, what horrors lurk in other vaults, unseen, unspoken, and unthinkable? Hello, agents. Curious about the most famous and shocking UFO cases? My new ebook uncovers 51 encounters the government tried to hide. Find it in the pinned comment. And if you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe. And there's another one waiting for you right here.